Hello, welcome to the Colors for Craft podcast, the podcast that aims to educate, inform, and engage our audiences about the meanings of color, textile, and craft coloration practices, and the future of color through research, education, and experiences, stemming from the Colors for Craft project based at the University of Helsinki. I am your host, Dr. Dustin Neighbors. In this episode, I am joined by Anna Nuutinen, Päivi Fernström, Pami Sinha, and Benton Titisari from the Colors for Craft Consortium as we explore art, craft, and design education. Join us as we discuss the importance of art, craft, and design education, what these educational and training programs consist of, how textile and color are incorporated into these programs, and how Colors for Craft contributes to these educational programs. Please allow me to introduce all of our guests. Professor Anna Nuutinen is Professor of Fashion and Clothing at the University of Lapland in the Faculty of Art and Design. Her research interests combine future studies, design, and craft. She applies these research paths to develop education and research in the field of fashion and clothing. Anna's artistic activities incorporate experimental futures research, where her designer's know-how and hands-on experience guide future-oriental thinking, the latest applications of which are shoes made from waste materials. Dr. Päivi Fernström is Senior University Lecturer in the Faculty of Educational Sciences at the University of Helsinki. Additionally, she holds the title of Docent of Textile Design at the University of Lapland. At the University of Helsinki, she has taught courses on design teaching, exploratory and experiential weaving and embroidery, and research methods since 2002. She has supervised theses on undergraduate, master's, and PhD levels. Her research areas are in textile and design history and dialogue with the present, design pedagogy, and artifact research. Professor Pami Sinha is Professor of Fashion Management at the University of Leeds School of Design. She is also currently the head of the Faculty Graduate School and the Faculty of Arts, Humanities, and Culture at the University of Leeds. She has served as subject leader for textiles from 2010 to 2013 at the University of Huddersfield, and as program director of the Bachelor's of Science program in Fashion and Textiles Retail from 2001 to 2010 at the University of Manchester. As a trained fashion designer, Dr. Sinha is interested in creative thinking and the craft of making and how craft and design contribute to sustainable development. Dr. Benton Titisari is a researcher, lecturer, and practitioner specializing in craft design with extensive experience in textile and fashion design. She is currently a postdoctoral researcher at the School of Design at the University of Leeds, working on the Colors for Craft project, where she explores the artistic and craft-based practices of natural dyes. Her research focuses on the sustainable practices, textile design, contemporary craft, natural colorants, and entrepreneurial within the textile and fashion industries. She earned her PhD from the University of Leeds, where her research focused on revitalizing traditional dyeing techniques in Indonesia. Anna, Päivi, Pami, and Benton, welcome. So let's just jump right into it. The first question I want to ask all of you is, how are each of you connected to art, craft, and or design education? Shall we start with Anna?
Since I was a child, I have been intended to become a fashion designer. It was really early years, I realized that I am interested in fashion. And at home, we had different magazines and newspapers, and I always looked through the pages for fashion information. My mother taught me to make clothes, and I tried to apply those interesting fashionable details to my creations. Sometimes I succeeded, sometimes I did not. When I went to school, I became more aware of fashion. During the different school years, my awareness of old and modern clothes, the timeliness of colors and materials grew. And especially in my teenage years, I really realized that fashion is much more than clothes. Then I wanted to become a fashion designer, but I first trained as a dressmaker. That training introduced me to making clothes, respecting the materials, and listening to the user. The design education at the University of Art and Design Though I remember that the name of the university was at that time University of Industrial Arts Helsinki, which is the predecessor of Aalto University. In that university, I expanded my dressmaking skills with the requirement of industrial design and manufacturing. After graduation, I thought I'd go to work in the design studio of some clothing factory in Finland. But when I graduated, Finnish clothing factories started closing their production lines and moved their production abroad to countries with lower production costs. Fortunately, at the same time, some retail chains started to hire designers to design the collections produced in the countries of the Far East. But this new way of designing fashion was almost only designing on paper, and there was hardly any concrete contact with the materials or opportunities to participate in the practical manufacturing process of the garments. After some years of that business, I decided to continue my studies and continued until the doctorate degree. At that point, I ended up in teaching and research positions in the universities, and there have been 3 universities since, and now I'm in the University of Lapland.
Well, that's exciting because one of the things that kind of how I got into it was my mother. My mother was a sewer and a crafter, and I saw her embroider. Unfortunately, I became one of her models of always trying the garment, putting the patterns on there and fitting it. So it's one of those things that there's something about what we learn in childhood, something that sparks that interest. And that's how I've always been into it, but I'm not any way talented in fashion design or anything like that. But it's interesting to see how much a childhood plays in our interest when it comes to fashion and designs and things like that. Päivi, what about you?
Yes, hello. I'm really Päivi from Finland and from Helsinki. Just a little bit like you both said, crafts and textiles have always fascinated me from my childhood already. And that's why maybe right after graduating from high school, I studied weaving for 2 years, Turku. That was very interesting, and that was very that is one of my key passions now. And after that weaving courses or weaving training, I applied to the University of Helsinki to study craft science in the Department of Education. And I also studied art education at the University of Art and Design, which is now part of Aalto University, like Anna just mentioned also. And now I'm like working here as a senior university lecturer, teaching and researching crafts. And I have thought for future craft teachers, like in exploratory and experiential weaving and embroidery, design teaching, research methods, and things like that. And because the weaving is one of my key passions, I'm very happy because I'm also responsible for weaving education here at the University of Helsinki. And I wrote my PhD thesis on Finnish textile designer Dura Jung and her damask textiles. Dura Jung is one of Finland's most significant reformers of damask art. And yes, I mean, craft is my life and textiles is very, very big part of my life.
If I may ask, because weaving is such a complicated, complex, and time-consuming, what really prompted the weaving to be an interest? Was it just putting it together? Was it the time to be able to put into it?
Maybe just because it's complex and it has complexity, and when you solve a problem and you can have the touch, the material touch and everything, colors and fibers and everything are matching. So it's wonderful.
It's one of the things about this project that we're really excited about is craft and well-being. And one of the things that I hear, especially when you talk about weaving, is there's something soothing about doing it. There's something kind of calming about it. It's no surprise that my favorite thing is Legos. And when I'm not writing or researching, having something tactile to do, it really calms me and it takes your mind off of it. And I could see how weaving would be that way for you. It's really exciting to have that kind of well-being or that kind of calm or to get away from the work, so to speak, even though weaving is your work, it also is a passion that you have. That's exciting.
Mm.
And Pammy, what about you?
Yeah, a lot of what Anna and Pivy have already said, sort of I can relate to. When I was very little, I used to dress my dolls, clothes for them, make their jewelry. It wasn't that I don't recollect being particularly conscious of fashion, but I clearly was interested in fashion because they were very fashionable clothes that I used to make for the dolls. And my mum always made my clothes for me as well. So in my dad was a doctor and we'd just come over from India, so we had no money whatsoever because you weren't allowed to come with anything more than £3. So it took a long time to build up your reserves here. So she hand sewed everything. So I kind of just followed on with what she did. She also taught me knitting and embroidery and things like that. Both my parents were from the science background, so the expectation was that I too would go into science. So art was always a secret sort of passion. Well, not just art, but anything crafty. Yeah, lots of home learned skills. And then after I'd done a degree in biochemistry and I'd got it, but I was just dreadful at it. I hadn't got the head for it or whatsoever. The future for me was lab work, and I just didn't see that that was going to keep me happy. So eventually I did take on an art and design foundation program with the idea, well, maybe I'll find out how to get into fashion at some point, thinking I wanted to be a designer. So I got to the foundation program and we had all sorts of things, art, fine art, pottery, drawing, and I went to all the evening classes, jewelry making, with the silversmithing and everything. Absolutely loved it. And then got to the degree. So I was at the Polytechnic in Birmingham doing fashion. But what they do is they rotate you for the first year. So you do 12 weeks or something like that in embroidery, knitwear or knitting, print making and pattern cutting for clothes. And then you have to make a choice. I couldn't make my mind up. I loved every one of those. So eventually, I did go into fashion, but I have to say, like Pivy, I found problem solving much more important than actually the finished garment. And, we did do all the things like trend forecasting and thinking of, what to make. So you'd make your ranges and the drew and everything. But that pattern cutting bit was the bit that I really loved. I went on and did an MA, and then while I was doing my MA, there was an opportunity to take on a PhD looking at the design process. So I thought, oh, that looks really interesting. So I applied for it, got the scholarship, did the PhD, and I didn't do any pattern cutting after that. So I haven't really done very much practical since then because it's all been teaching and mainly on the management and marketing side. So since I've been at the university, so I've been like Anna, 3 universities. Started out at Salford where I did my PhD, then the University of Manchester where I did 10 years, went to Huddersfield for 4 years, and then came to Leeds. So all of this time I've been teaching, researching and adminning. Gosh, it's over 25 years now since I started my teaching. Yeah, so to sort of have some sanity in my life, I do some pottery once a week. So for 2 hours, I just do a complete brain dump and simply do things with the hand and don't think about anything whatsoever. So that's how. So I guess much like Anna and Pivy and yourself, learning at your mum's knees really did sort of bring forth a lot of your basic thoughts about what you love and what your passions are.
That's really nice. I do have, out of curiosity, what do your parents think now that you went into chemistry, went into the sciences, but you kind of came out on the side of fashion and design, and how do they feel about that?
And they love it. They weren't very happy about it at first, but they could see a science career was not in my calling whatsoever. They could see it wasn't going to make me happy, wasn't going to make them happy. So when I changed track, my mum was, both parents, but my mum was especially supportive, which I found really strange at first.
I think when parents see us happy doing something that we enjoy, they then realize, oh, that's what they're meant to do or they should do. And I think they become supportive after that. I think there's always that initial, we want you to do this, but then when they see there is no happiness in it, yeah, absolutely. And Benton.
Hi, Dustin. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so quite similar probably story with others, but my connection to craft design education is very related with my upbringing. So most of my family work in education sectors, like my grandparents and my parents, my auntie, my uncle, lecturers or professors. So I've always wanted to be an educator. I want to be like them. So, but my love for textile, I think, started when I saw how to make batik, like how to make batik process when I was a child. Then I all love craft and art Jack in my school. So yeah, I create many things. But then, and I know to be a lecturer, I need to have a high education. So I took bachelor, master degree in textile design, textile craft design in Indonesia, where I'm my home country, and then I took it in the UK. And yeah, so and it grows on me, and yeah, and then I start teaching as a lecturers in Indonesia as well. I like teaching. I love talking with students, even though sometimes they can test my passions as well. But then I also very lucky. I was involved in a project with the EU, Horizon EU as well, about modern Asian curriculum. So I learned more about education there and how to change the curriculum, like learning outcomes and so on. But then, yeah.
Well, I completely agree with you when it comes to teaching and the excitement. There's something about you being in a classroom with students who want to be there, first of all. Most of the courses, they want to be there. Then there's the enthusiasm of what they really want to learn. They're very curious. And the questions that they ask, sometimes they throw questions to me. I'm like, I never even thought of that. And they inspire me. And I think that we feed off of each other. I think students really learn from us and they really feed off of our passions. And we do the same from them. Like they give us ideas. So it's really exciting to see that with you. And I'm assuming it's for everyone in terms of what education brings to you. But that actually is a great segue into our next question, which is when we think about education and we think about training, particularly when we think about what does craft and design education consist of? We start thinking about the skills, we start thinking about the materials. So what, in your opinion, does craft and design education consist of?
Yeah, well, I think one thing that come in my mind when you ask that is, well, with the craft, there's a lot of practical making skills that involve then material knowledge. But then also one thing that I know about tacit knowledge, like a knowledge that you can earn by doing it for certain times. But then also we point out about like critical thinking, creative problem solving as well. So, yeah, I think that's what I can say. And then again, it apply to any craft and design education, but on textile, probably it will focus on like how to weave, like Coffee mentioned, like how to dye. In my expertise, I work a lot with resist dyeing technique, so I explore a lot of it dyeing technique.
So I think, so if I sum up, it's experiential learning. So it's gaining the experience of doing certain skills, doing certain practices in there. Okay.
Theory is important as well, but then they need to try.
Yeah.
I just thought that research and exploration part of studying from the very beginning also. And you asked about the skills. If we talk about the textiles, so yes, everything like weaving, embroidery, dyeing, but very important is the design thinking and problem solving, like Pintan said. And the reason, did you ask also the reason why they are taught? So if I think about our students, so I think that they think one is to preserve and pass craft knowledge and traditional knowledge, and maybe to innovate and push boundaries in design, technology and sustainability. Sustainability is very big focus on and natural and recycled materials. They are like I said, increasingly important in our university, as I said. So,
and I think that's one of the things, if anything, that all of you have said in the beginning when we were doing the introductions, is we learn from our parents, we learn from our childhood, and that passing that knowledge down. And I think just as the education courses, it's passing that knowledge on, it's preserving, because if everything is gone, then who do we learn from? Where do we get that knowledge of how certain, one of the things that interested me, we were in Tartu for our consortium meeting, and we were looking at the belts that they woven, and I looked at each of the different belts, and they were done in a different pattern. They were done in different ways, and how you create those patterns sometimes may be very simple, but then very complex. And to learn how to make those patterns requires someone who's done it, and that practicing and learning from the people and having that knowledge. So it's also about recording the knowledge and reading that knowledge.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what you were mentioning, Paivi. I think that ties to our connections as well. Anna, Pammi, do you want to add anything?
I would to make some definitions. I was thinking about this. What is the difference between craft skills, textile skills, and design skills? And also there was some idea about the art. And if I really simple way think about what is craft skill, it is for me basically primarily the skill of making something. And there were, like Päivi mentioned, that what for? If there is always a meaning, but basically you know somehow or learn from somewhere how to make something to get something else. And then textile skills, they are skills to manipulate textile materials or other materials, or skills in general to make something from textile material into a product. So I thought that it's a bit further away from those craft skills, although they are interconnected. And then design skill is the broadest and multidimensional skill. First, design skills can be the aesthetic arrangement of visual elements to achieve a desired appearance of a concrete product. That might be the general idea that quite many people think about first. But then it is about solving material or immaterial problems. And third, for example, in fashion design, design skills are a set of mechanical, technical, business, and interpersonal skills, so that you need quite many different sorts of skills to really be able to work in that area. And then about the art, that's something that there is also already somebody mentioned about well-being. Art is considered to be a thing to get better well-being or prevent, for example, yourself from marginal positions in the society. But also, it is in education, we quite often think about it as general studies, so that it supports everything else, but it is somehow maybe in the center, it is tying together everything else, all the aspects of crafts, textiles, and design skills. That the way we can get more importance for the art, because it is some sort of also innate way of thinking. It is not something that we learn from outside or from teachers or from experts, but we are somehow having that in our genes, and we need to make something, express ourselves through art.
Great clarification. Thank you for that, because that is one of the questions I think when we think about education. How are they interconnected? What are you actually doing in each of these skills? And then how does it add up to the whole? And I think you've just given us a very clear step-by-step kind of demonstration there.
Yeah, I don't teach craft skills on a practical level. Most of my classes are management classes, but most of the management students are wannabe designers who don't want to actually design. So they want to be in a design company or a design area where they are in a management role. I approach it as very much about they have to understand what activities designers go through, what skills they need, and the management of all of that. So much like what, Hannah had defined the differences between design, art, and crafts. I have a very similar sort of approach to it. There was a book that really influenced me at the beginning of my PhD, which was by Brian Lawson, How to Be a Designer. It was a really clear explanation about the difference between art, craft, and design. And he went through the process of the problem for an art, that an artist has to decide when they've come to an end. For a designer, there's a defined end, there's a brief that needs to be followed. There's a set of principles that they need to follow, plus all that business and management. The craft is in the actual making of it. So that really kind of helped me to get a really good sort of feeling for how to look at people, the skill sets in a different way. And I kind of still follow that with my teaching. So I still try and enlighten students by either getting them to see designers in action, or if time is against everyone nowadays, so we no longer have the time to actually make within the classes that I teach, because everything's getting increasingly smaller and smaller. But they go through the process. What are the activities? Why are things actually shaped in the way? Why are those decisions being taken? How long does the decision actually take? How many people are involved in so all of the ins and outs. So, from a large company to a small company, and the fact that everyone does the same things, but they do it in different ways because the size of the company is different, the target markets are different, etc., etc. So that's how, from a management or a marketing perspective, that's how I approach the skills.
I think that's a very important part of it, because I think it also involves time management, expenses, thinking about the things that cost in terms of being able to make something. Like, how long does it actually take for a craft skill to make something? Where does that lead to next? And it's having a realistic expectation of that, to be able to quantify it, or to even put it into a numerical factor in terms of money, how much time is involved in that. And I think that also gives an appreciation for what actually it takes to be involved. Because I think too often, if we look at Project Runway, that and I bring that up because that's one of the biggest things I grew up on. I always loved the dresses that they made. But you only see in those competitions a very short window, and you see how stressed it can take. And if you had more time, you could do this. That's one of the things to appreciate, is that the skills that it takes, the professionalism that it takes, but also the time skills, the time management that it has to take as well. That's a very important aspect of this. So it's good to know that those things are being incorporated as well.
I just want to add a little bit. I think you mentioned as well, like about the cultural studies, not just only it related with the historical or culture in before, but it's also because we always, as a crafter and designer, we produce something that will be used by people. So we need to understand, their their needs and their culture as well. That's very important. I think it was mentioned before. So
no, and I think that's a very good point, because if we think about in terms of the fact that we're mass producing things in the industry, I think it puts the machine in and it takes the human out. Because you're producing something so fast, you don't realize that actually for someone to make this by hand or to make it themselves, it takes longer. It takes out that human factor of, the work, the detail, the time that's been put into it. And I think that that's a very important thing that we forget when we're thinking about the industry, whether it's fashion, whether it's dyeing, all of that stuff. And that's why maybe if we think about getting things that are handmade or crafted, it costs more because there's more time. You're taking out the machine, but there's something value in that as well.
Yeah, and also just add a little bit more, like when we talk about textile, where we create pattern there, and then we need to very aware where, for example, I can use my example from Indonesia, where there's some pattern that allowed to wear by a king, for example, then you can't actually produce that. That's part of the cultural studies or the contextual studies that, part of the education. So they need to know that as well.
Absolutely. But I think that one of the things that this question is bringing up, and Anna, you kind of started this, and I kind of want to touch on it before we move on. So you talk about craft skills and you talk about design skills, and you talk about craft skills being something that you make. What does that entail? What are you making? Are you making the thread? Does that include craft skills? Is it putting the textile together, involving the weaving? Is that a craft skill? What exactly when we distinguish what type of actions go with craft skill versus design skill, what would you say?
I was just thinking about this concept and in relationship of the program renewal that we did recently in the University of Lapland, and we used to have earlier two separate majors, which were fashion design and textile design or textile art, and now we combine them into one major. Immediately, what happened was that in addition to those industrial skills that we teach or taught during those previous times when there was two separate majors, we had to include craft skills into the courses. Of course, it helps us to think about the sustainability and responsibility and those modern time issues. But it also means that we have to think about the making and, for example, making textiles from the beginning and making prints to the textiles if we would like to have some patterns. Then cutting the textiles. So it means that there is many layers of work, many layers of craft skills, many layers of making. So even though I basically previously simplified those concepts, but it means that they are really complicated as they are themselves, and then the combination of them. So they are kind of system, so that we cannot really think about those skills today as separate skills only. We have to think about how they are involved in our everyday life. And also, of course, in our case, in the education, how we pass them along to the next generation of designers.
Yeah. Päivi?
Yes, it's wonderful to hear, Anna. Somehow you are coming back like Bauhaus thinking, that craft skills is coming to your design thinking also. I have one comparison summary here I found somewhere. I don't know, are you agree with this, that what is art, craft, and design? Somebody had said that art is about expression and interpretation, and craft is about handmade skill and tradition. Design is about functionality and problem solving. I think these are not maybe so interesting to categorize, but somehow this is one thing.
What I like about that expression is it shows the interconnection, how one builds on the other. And I think that that's a really great expression. I may have to get that from you so we can put that somewhere on the website or in a post. Pami?
I find the differences are really interesting, but I also find them a little bit problematic as well, because
Exactly.
I think that from as a craftsperson, you are expressing yourself as well, and your love and passion for the craft that you have, that's got to come out. So, if as long as you're not one of those people that have been forced into making things, I mean, that's a completely different scenario. But most people, when they are producing items based on their skills or their interests, there's an expression that they have in making the products. I find it difficult to understand how expression of craft differs from expression in art. I understand that there is a difference, but I don't understand what that difference is.
Yeah, I really agree.
Yeah.
Yes,
And then exactly. And then about functionality, again, I don't really understand that functionality is an issue or something that, as it does, comes from design, because again, as a craftsperson, you're going to be thinking about, to some extent, how something works. So I think it's a very difficult sort of concept. Can't think of any other way of doing it or saying it. Again, I totally understand where those differences are. So I kind of think that in my head, I find it difficult. I know that there's a big debate between art and craft. I find it very hard to understand where that line is between art and craft, because it's all about the hand. It's all about the vision of what you want at the end. The project may not be the same, but I feel the thinking that goes on, there's a similarity that goes on in there. For instance, I have a friend who's a fine artist, but she does work with craft materials and she does craft practice kind of stuff within her fine art. So, there's clearly quite a big sort of similarity in terms of approach. So yeah, I just, again, I'm not disagreeing with the differences. I find it very difficult to sort of see where the lines are.
But it's a unique perspective, and it sounds like particularly within this field, it can't be compartmentalized. It can't be separate. Anna, did you want to add to that?
There was something that Pami mentioned about this comparison of art and craft, and I remember it just came to my mind that during my education, sometimes somebody somehow said that art is free and craft is precise. So that when I am a craftsman, craftswoman, I have to do something really well and all the stitches should be perfect. And for example, in high fashion, that is something that is quite much connected to that. So maybe that comes from the area of fashion where I got my education. And then the art is free, so I have time or space to experiment. And there is no rules how to really use some materials. Do I use them correct or incorrect way? So there are somehow differences, but as Pammi mentioned, this is really complex set of concepts. And I think that during these years of 2000, we have been in the situation that this terminology is going to find new translations so that art and craft could be intertwined, and fashion and textile is something else that we earlier had thought about. So this is basically quite interesting time, but it makes it also quite difficult to find terminology when you write an essay for research uses or if you try to teach somebody. So because students who don't know so many things, you should give quite much information for them and also try to find out those places or those corners or some problems in the study path, so that even though you are not sure about something, you can give them some idea about how things are and they can continue from that.
I think that's really interesting that you point that out, because lately one of the things that I've been battling with is this concept of using AI in coursework. And I think that speaks to something that happens, what you're talking about, Anna, which is the evolution of certain fields, certain educational practices, because the more we get introduced to technology, and in the case of Colors for Craft, when we become connected to natural dyes and to dye processes and technology, the way that the education happens, what's incorporated in that education, and those definitions will evolve and change because it's incorporating new aspects. That it's really hard to define something today because it's all intertwined, it's all interconnected. But at the basis, there's the certain definition that comes out, or a person who is a crafter and a designer, or whether you have a person who is an artist and a crafter, like these perceptions of what they actually are, or these definitions are, will differ with each person. And that's the evolution of the field.
I just think that to me, it's it's in the eye of the beholder. It's the target market and who actually is going to, if it's intended for an audience of art buyers, then it's art. If it's intended for the local markets where people are interested in seeing skills, materials, etc., it might be more craft. If it's in the big shops, it's more design. I say that because there's so much craft that involves high technology, and the skills are there by hand, but they're also there in terms of the use of machines to actually develop an idea or a concept. So as Anna was saying, I think the definitions probably need to be redefined, but to me, I think it's more in person who the project is intended for, or the end goal is for.
Good point. Benton.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to absorb while the discussion going on. I agree with everything actually, but I think one thing, because I will not go touch the art and craft, between art and craft, but I probably want to add a little bit about craft and design. So in craft itself, in the old days is that it always requiring manual dexterity, but then that's what Pami said. But now there's a lot of craft that also involve a lot of technologies. That's why I think in the early 2000s, there's new that called neo-craft, where they allow craft activities using technology or machine, as long as there's still some expression. I also agree about the expression as well. But I think what I always understand between art and craft, at least, that you can still use an expression, but in craft products, there's always some function there. In art, usually it's just an artwork, art pieces. If you talk about fashion, then maybe if you talk about couture, for example, that's probably included in craft. Or if it's just one-off and you can't really wash it, or the level of functionality is quite low, maybe it will be considered a high art. But again, I agree with everybody here, you can't really differentiate, oh, this is art, this is craft. But in terms of design, related with the mass production. So either it's in the industry level or craft level, but that's why sometimes people say, oh, it's craft or it's craft design because it's already produced in mass production as well. But to be honest, the line between craft and design at the moment is very, very, very close because there are more and more, but because Pavi mentioned about Bauhaus, in designer, there was like very industrial approach at that time. But now like there are more and more design or industry like looking at the culture, the tradition, which is that craft design.
Well, I think you're all hitting on a very important point that I think summarizes kind of what we're talking about, which is the whole point of education, art, design, and craft education is essentially also keeping in touch with the changing, either the mode, the method, the influences of arts and crafts and those design skills is being able to keep track of what's happening, what emerging technologies are coming in, what are the old tradition versus the new tradition. And I think that's a key element from what I hear from all of you talking about is education. Talking about that, I want to kind of ask you about the student perspective. So in your experience, the students that come into the courses or that have worked on courses, what do they come for? Do they come to learn craft skills, design skills? Do they want to know more about fashion? Are they coming in as artists that want to expand their expertise or experience? Why do students learn craft and design skills?
My thinking is that students come to craft and textile education for many different reasons. Some want to develop their craft skills, only for that, sometimes also artistic skills. Some want to become researchers, but if they come to our university, I think the main thing is the craft pedagogy, that they want to have the ability to teach craft also. Like I said earlier, that they are always very interested in sustainable craft. They want also to preserve cultural heritage and so on.
That's a really interesting point because one of the things that as an outsider coming into Finland, that I really noticed is there's a huge crafting community. Like you go into stores, there's crafting, there's needles, there's different types of thread, there's bio-based, there's synthetic, there's all of these. And I have never seen, in the States we have like Joanne Fabrics or we have these stores. But there's something about everywhere you look, something is homemade. People are wearing homemade knitted sweaters or the socks. I love woolly socks in Finland, but it's really interesting to see that that's a thing in Finnish culture that I don't see in the UK or in America. And I think that's really interesting. It's a really big community and push, I think, in Finland that there's crafting. I don't know if that's associated with the fact that there's the winter month and people want something to do with their hand or, if that's where it comes from. But I do think you hit on something that there's an emphasis on craft and then learning how to actually teach that. Anna.
Thank you for pointing out about these nice things about Finland. I have seen those years that there has not been so much craft shops or yarn shops or craft make. So it has been maybe during this century that we have really got lots of hobbyists, and you can see all those knitting ladies and homemade socks available. But there has been this, like late before 2000, like this 1990s, there was this low side movement that everything was downsizing and going off from Finland or from shops, so that it was really difficult to find, for example, really nice woolen fabrics or really nice woolen yarns. But luckily we have got those things back, and people have been really interested in making knit products or crochet products by themselves. And also one nice thing that, for example, we have this unfortunate problem with our eastern neighbor and Ukraine, and we are knitting, for example, for the Ukrainians, socks and this woolen products so that they can have some nice things in their everyday life. So we have this sort of helping to also going on. But if I think about going back to the question that why students learn craft skills, like in our university in Rovaniemi, students they apply to our program. They know that that's design program. they have to learn certain things, but quite often they would like to include the self-making in their things, that we are giving assignments for them to do certain things. And we seem to have quite often industrial or mass production or semi-sized production in mind, but students want to slow down and do some things so they can have like few pieces or even one piece of something. And they are really helping us to reflect our ways of teaching, our ways of writing the goal to the education, so that the self-make is really challenging the design field and design education, also design research. I like that idea that they are really, the students, the young people are really asking questions with their knitting needles or something.
That's really good to hear. And I do want listeners to know that Finland woolly socks are amazing. There's something about when you put them on, they don't make your feet hot, they don't itch, because I have tried woolly socks in the UK and they have made my feet itch. So I will test anyone to come to Finland to buy the woolly socks. I am converted, so you have to come check them out. But that's the whole idea around the sock, why that keeps coming up. Maybe Pammy and Benton, we might have to get you a pair of woolly socks from Finland.
I want to add this discussion about why students, want to learn craft or design. I know some of my students think because designer is cool, like very, I want to be a designer. I want to be a cool person. I want to create something. And as shallow as it is, it was actually their drive. But then they also look at the economic opportunities, as in like they can pursuing their career and then they can make their own brand. I think most of my students are, they always come with like, oh, I want to have my own brand. I want to be like, I don't know, like Alexander McQueen, for example. I want to create dress like someone. So there's a mix of, I think when they said that, they don't really think because if they become Alexander McQueen, they will earn a lot of money. They're more like, because he's cool, I want to be part of that cool, community.
I think that's a very interesting point, but then I'm going to play devil's advocate. Okay, if that's why you're coming, how realistic is that? Because if you think about, well, to be cool, or to say, I want to be like a designer, I want to design, and yet they're not in it for the money, that's fine. But how realistic is it that you go to a point that your design is going to be seen? Like, how realistic is that? Because, yes, I'm all for passion, and it's not always about money, but there is an element of, where's the success in that?
So one of my leaders that I was lecturing, so we forced them to be creative and, as creative as they can. And then on the last year, we gave them like entrepreneurship courses, and then to bring back to reality, like, well, you can be creative, but you can still need to sell to make a living. So that's when they start compromise with the, their artistic and the customer demand, how to, like to see the market and everything. But as an educator, like in the beginning, they need to be, encouraged to actually, produce something, because to think out of the box, to be creative, that's part of the craft and design.
Yeah, I was going to say that I teach design management rather than design. So when I was at Manchester, I had a brilliant opportunity, which I took with both hands, to develop a fashion studio. It was all in my hands to find somebody that would supply the sewing machines, the tailor's dummies, and actually design the whole room as well. So brilliant. Really hard work, but absolutely so satisfying to actually have the finished thing. And we had space for about 20 students at a time. And it was on the back of the fashion retailing program that I was program leader for. I'd suggested that we bring in these modules where the fashion retail students who don't want to be designers, but they want to work in a fashion house and understand, the management of it all. So I proposed that we should teach them how design actually is influenced by marketing decisions or by buying decisions, and what actually happens if you suddenly change your mind, or if things differ from what the specification was, and why should it not happen? What are the problems, etc. So I developed a set of modules that built up on, and it was an optional module, and every year it grew. And the students who took that module were ones who really wanted to understand that business and design relationship. So, decisions made in the head office would have an impact in terms of the manufacturing of that product. And they had to go through that process themselves. So they didn't have to be good at it. They just needed to learn that, well, actually, this is what happens with the sewing machine. This is what happens if you decide, well, it's got to be an invisible as opposed to a visible zip. Yes, it needs to be 2 inches hem. No, we want to change it to 1 inch. What actually is the impact in terms of product that is going to be made? Why is it expensive to have changes halfway through? So those students who really wanted to get grips with fully understanding the implications of management decisions on product design. That's the only, and we did one on trend forecasting as well. So they were able to put together design skills, because what was required of them was a portfolio and whatever product that they wanted to make at the end of their trend forecast. So these were retail students who hadn't come in to learn design as such, but they were very interested in it, and especially the links with business and how business and design impacted on one another.
That's the realistic point of like, okay, you're encouraging their design, their creativity, their skill, but you're also saying, here's what you need to be aware of. Here's what you need to think about. And that's really important, I think. I do think that if you love it, you do it. But if you love it enough and you want to drive and go somewhere further with it, you have to understand the realistic side of it. Anna, Päivi, you want to add anything else?
Maybe because I'm coming from the craft part, I want to point out that craft is also about more than just skills. Teaching craft is about more than just skills, because it nurtures creativity, problem solving, and an appreciation for materials and making. But it connects people to cultural heritage. It fosters sustainable thinking and provides hands-on learning experiences. And maybe we are now in this digital world, so that's why it's very important also.
That's a really good perspective to bring in, because not everything is about having an end product. Sometimes it's learning how to preserve, but it also brings up the materials, thinking about the way the materials are produced. And that ties into the next question, which is when we think about design and craft education, there's 2 things that connect us to the Colors for Craft project. It's colors and textiles. So how do color and textiles fit within craft and design education?
In terms of my own teaching, they learn about design process. And from a retailing point of view, color is the first thing that people see. It's also one of the first decisions that are made in terms of product development for fashion, because obviously you have to decide what colors you're going to make these clothes in. So color and textiles are introduced to my students as being the first, color being the first, textiles being the second, sort of for industrial design. So yeah, so it's primary decisions that be made. That's how it fits into my own teaching. And I know that when I was design student myself, genuinely speaking, they would be the first things that you would look at. What kind of colors, because color creates a mood, and then what kind of textiles, because again, the textile is going to create the shapes or the textures that you want. So those 2 kind of go very much hand in hand, I think, from a design perspective.
Anyone want to add, comment?
I would like to say something. Pammi, I have heard quite many times from you that this thing that you mentioned, or also in here, that color is the choice, the first decision that should be made. Also, you mentioned that the material is important, and it is interesting that recently I have been not really in bad way arguing, but anyway arguing about the fact that what comes first, material or color? Because color cannot be without material. And for example, now in our project, we need to think about also the materials, because we are discussing about natural dyes. So it means that we have to have the material first, at least in form of plants. So that's one thing that we have to now discuss more about the order of things. But I think that color is really a visual thing that influences the attractivity of the products. That's something that we somehow need or want to have. And also it means that since we are quite much thinking about that we have to slow down something in the fashion. But if it was just a color, that if we change just the color and the fashion changes, if we think about the fashion means the same kind of clothing always, like T-shirt, it's almost the same in our eyes, so that there are only back and front and two sleeves. So if it only change the color, and then we can say that now it's the new fashion. Is it so? Can it be so? And then quite often color is also the visual thing that enhances the appearance of the user. So we would like to every now and then get some new color because we would like to look different, or we would like to have some other kind of mood. And that comes to the idea that also color reflects the time. In Tartu, there was a question, or there was somebody mentioned that there is always nowadays like these pastel colors, and they didn't really agree with that because they didn't like the pastels. But it's quite often said that when there are these difficult political times going on, the world somehow turns to pastel. And it doesn't mean that we would like to make life softer just with the choice of just painting everything with some pale colors. But it means that all the money goes to the war fields or somewhere else, and the intensity, it somehow takes also intensity from the colors, and then the remaining colors or dyes are pastel colors. So that way today we can say that it is not us designers who say what is fashionable color. It might be the politicians that with the actions or through the actions say what is the fashionable color. It's awful to say so, but this might be one thing behind all these things what are going on.
One of the things that underlines what you're also saying is and probably you as well, is there's also the consideration, or maybe ask this question, which is how much does cost factor into looking at colors, looking at materials from an education standpoint and also from a management standpoint? How important is the cost of naturally dyed yarn or naturally dyed materials important in the education process or in the management process?
I remember going to Premier Vision a few years ago, and there was such a difference between the greens depending on the market that they were, the audience that they were trying to attract. So there are differences in colours depending on which market you go into. And there was one year when we had a lot of very natural looking colours, so beiges, sand and moss and all of these sort of colours, which one associates as being natural dyes. But obviously since doing some more reading about it and seeing what possible, it's a much broader range. But for those who don't have that background, those are the colours that you kind of see as being natural. And what seemed to transpire over the season, which began very, very popular with these very natural colours, the luxury label designers wouldn't go near that colour because the mass market were making such a volume of that their collections were completely different. And that was a very strange thing to see because they follow, but on that business it was quite noticeable that they weren't following that particular trend. From a trend point of view, there is a difference. I completely take on Anna's argument about all the other elements that come into deciding what the colours are. I think from this project's perspective, I think what's been really interesting is looking at how something like trend forecasting and natural dyes or biocolors are going to be, what are the implications of incorporating that into education? Bintan and myself have been doing interviews here in the UK. I know Anna and Päivi and a whole raft of people have been doing interviews in Finland and in various colleges and universities around there. So we're very interested in looking at, because so far all of the education has been based on synthetic dyes and what the industry is currently making use of. And if we want to develop more industry friendly, well, not industry friendly, but natural dyes that can be scaled up to a level that industry can make use of and actually develop commercial ranges from, then where do we start? How does that learning get into industry? Industry presumably is too busy making sure that they're commercially successful in order to be able to continue providing livelihoods, product, business success. So, there's a whole raft of responsibilities that businesses have. And experimenting probably is a little bit outside of their time, even though they do obviously innovate, but there's a limit to how much can actually be done on a full scale. So we're looking at it from a educational point of view. Does it change the way that we teach colour? And I know that people have been, lots of interviews, which presenting at conferences or developing into papers.
No, that's really good. And I think from what I'm hearing so far is that when we talk about color and, textiles, they're a very crucial part of not only the education, but on the management of the production side as well. I think what is coming out, particularly within this project, is thinking about what is the viability of natural colors. And then once we can determine that, then we can change the education curriculum to incorporate thinking about natural colors, producing natural colors, and how to design and craft skills with it. Am I right in that summary so far?
When I hear about this question, how does color and textile fit within craft and design education? I wasn't think that far ahead, like Pami and Anna mentioned about how the implication in the industry. But it's actually, when we look at it, if we look at only in education only, where of course the color and textile are very crucial in terms of design and craft, because like Pami said, the people see the color first, and also with the textile, there's always material perception, when we use silk and when we use wool and we use cotton. So there's always, and then probably a red from, I don't know, cochineal in cotton will be different, and the one in silk will be different. That's when, color matching, that's what we usually, focus about color and textile in education, in design and education, how the color will look differently in different material, and how color also will look differently with different technique, like when you do it in the jacquard, or if you do it in the dyeing process, if you do it in printing, printing, silk screen printing or digital printing. Focus on how color and textile fit in the craft and design education. But if we talk about the implication industry, then the color forecasting are very important as well, because then how to reach the market. But then, if we looking at how our project will fit in, I think what you summarize are correct, Dustin. So we want to see how the natural dyes, because it's always what you call consists of color and textile from different sources, can fit in the education, and also can fit in the industry. That's what Pami mentioned, that we had the interview on both educators and also practitioners, because we want to see from both point of view. I found out so far that this can't be separated as well. Like the education provide what the industry needs, because industry kind of like leading everything actually. So even though the education want to change all the synthetic dyes with natural dyes, and then providing a lot of graduates that really export the natural dyes, but then if the industry not ready yet, it's not work very well.
I like how you were talking about as a very central, like how, colors and textiles are into the process of just designing itself, of coming together. One of the things that we're excited about that will be coming out is Päivi and Laura Seppala's blog post will be coming out. And one of the things that really struck me, and that ties into this discussion about color and textile, is the importance now in today's society with doing things that are sustainable, that are eco-friendly, that are, and it seemed like, especially from what Päivi was talking about in the blog, that there is a lot of crafters in the community and the craft education students as well that really are drawn to being able to produce naturally dyed ingredients. There's a connection that they make, being with nature, the sustainability of it all, that's what a push for why they're doing this, because particularly in a society where climate change is a big issue, where, chemical production is harming the environment, a lot of, particularly when you go back to that craft, that artist, the design aesthetic, the natural ingredients, the natural textiles are very important. That maybe is something that we're seeing in the future that will drive whether natural colors become more important than the synthetic. Maybe, maybe not.
Maybe.
Maybe. I want to move to the next question because if we're thinking about colors and textiles, particularly within craft and design education, and we're thinking about the way that craft and design education is put together, what happened and the materials that are involved, my question then is how much of a role does geography, location, and culture play in this education and training within these skills?
From my experience, because I look at education in Indonesia, I also teach in Brunei, and now I see like in the UK, I think it plays a very big role, the geography and the cultural in education and training of craft in textile and craft design. Like, because for example, like we talk about, because you mentioned about sustainability, first about the local materials, probably like there are some natural fibers that are available in Indonesia or like available in Finland, but not available in the UK. So that plays one thing. And also like, I remember this is a very concise example, like I'm not very familiar with wool because in Indonesia we don't need wool. It's very warm. But we are very familiar with silk and cotton, for example. So yeah, local materials, which is related to the geographical, play a very important role here. But also the cultural. You mentioned like, oh, why Finland has a very strong, socks and knitting, and that I think that's culture. They really, how do I say it? They're really proud with craft. I mean, I'm not saying the other not proud, but they are like different priorities in different country. Like for example, maybe in Indonesia we are focused on economic, so we just kind of focus on how to sell things maybe more profitable, and so I think some country has different priorities as well, and it will translate in their education, in their curriculum. So because they need to produce some graduates at the end.
I think geography does have quite a big impact on design education. First of all, you get the practicalities. So I think when Bintan was doing the interviews here in the UK, we were surprised at the number of courses, design courses that had the color dye gardens. So, the natural plants for dyeing, they developed these dye gardens. We were comparing notes with our partners in Finland. It was a throwaway comment, but well, we don't really have dye gardens. We go out and we collect. And it occurred to me that actually we have nowhere to go collect. We don't have nature
Yeah.
around us. So, it's a sense of we wouldn't have natural dyes to teach our students because we don't have natural dyes growing naturally around us. So we have to have these dye gardens, whereas it's naturally occurring over there. So I think there's practicalities, not socks, of course, it's cold. We probably need knitted woolen socks just to keep warm, whereas in Indonesia they wouldn't be welcome whatsoever because actually they would be a real hindrance. So I think practicalities is a big thing. There's a lot of attitude as well. So I love the Finnish attitude towards craft and how important it is in design education because I think that's something that seems to be not as emphasized. I wouldn't say it's lost, but it's not as emphasized within design education here. So a lot of the emphasis is on process and industry and management as opposed to the craft of or the skills of actually designing. So when you do get designers that are particularly skilled in design courses, they are lauded. They're really valued because it's unusual because there will be something innate and they will have worked on it for themselves. Whereas I think from what I hear about the design education in Finland, it seems to be part and parcel of how one teaches design, and that's kind of I think it's it's not as prominent from my experience. And as again, please, I do sense that there's a certain attitude towards craft in Finland that I don't feel here in the UK.
It's nice that you have been discussing quite much about the socks. I just started to realize socks as marking something about Finnish culture. Because if we think about this Lutheran working ethics, we should be always working. We should not have a spare time for just relaxing. We should always be working. So knitting is really a simple way to just fill all the empty spaces in our everyday life. That's a bit humorously said, but anyways, there is a history in that. And then socks are really easy. In Finland, sometimes the situation has been that you have to go somewhere else to work. And or maybe in the countryside you have to take care of your farm and your cows and lambs and everybody it means that if you have some time that you just let cows eat in the outside and you have to just look after them, what else you do but knit socks, because it's easy to carry the socks and the yarns and needles with you, so you can multitask at the same time. And also since we have quite long winters and dark evenings, so you can knit in the dark also. So you can constantly do something. We have political decisions. Politicians had said that Finnish higher education institutions must focus on strengthening their profiles and fulfilling both national and regional needs of working and business life. And for us in the University of Lapland, it gives some content for our education, so that we have to really think about the Arctic dimension, climate change, and environmental issues in our workings and these education decisions, or in our research areas. So it means that in addition to the employability of the students, so that the graduates can get the job where we educate them, we have to really look at all those political issues that are given for us to just take care of. So that's one thing, that it is not only hobbyists or educators who take care of these craft things, but also politicians. Our government is really keenly looking at us and also trying to keep the whole Finland populated, so that we have education from south to north, and every education location is somehow related to the nature or the environment around it, and there is always some local things in addition to the cultural things that deal with the whole Finland.
Definitely hearing attitude is one, location, seasonal as well, because you've been talking about the season, but you would have it in Finland, and the same with the UK. So they're seasonal. What about colors? How are colors different by location, geography, or culture?
The light.
The light is the one issue, I think, here, if you're thinking about colors. We don't have light here in north of Finland, but and we don't use very strong colors normally, quite much like black and gray. And sorry to say, but it's like so. And I don't know, maybe in Tunisia, how do you use colors?
Well, I know when I go to
Yes,
India,
yeah.
then the colors that I like, which are the softer colors, they become nothing. You can't see them because everywhere else is very bright. Very strong, very bright colors, and they suit the climate. So you can't. Well, you can, but they just look so much better in the light over there, in comparison to bringing the same color over here. They kind of look quite garish in the northern hemisphere. So I think color, the light, the daylight is a huge influence on color.
I agree. Can I ask, back to the questions a little bit? When I think about it again, what different between education is also the cultural heritage. I just thinking about the dyeing, for example, like some will use like dyeing fat to create color, for example, but maybe in India and Indonesia we use like block printing techniques. So for example, maybe block printing techniques will not be taught in the UK because maybe there's no, cultural related there. So I think the cultural heritage also influenced the education, but also technology as well. Like I feel like because the technology are existed in here, and for example in the UK are very modern, then they can do like any, like for example digital printing with natural dyes is possible in the UK because the technology are exist, but not possible maybe in I can say again in Indonesia because it's very expensive. So it's very interesting.
And I definitely think that one of the things that comes out when we're talking about like the colors that are in different, how colors are made in terms of, like you're saying, the VAT versus the block printing. There's also the availability of resources. So if we're going back to the seasons again, one of the things that really struck me and are really exciting about University of Lapland, Jenni-Liisa and the team, was the production of color throughout the season based on the availability of what is out in nature. And that's something I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe Pami and Benton will agree, but we see the difference, I think, in Nordic countries. There's a huge emphasis and value on the environment. There's the right here, and I think it's in Finland, but it's also in Sweden, is the right of every man to be able to walk and to go everywhere, to be able to have access to nature and the plants and ingredients that are out there. And I think that's something that's very specific to the culture and to the values of the Nordic countries, particularly in Finland. There's such a protection of the environment, and also it showed what is available in the environment. Would you agree, Anna and Päivi, about that?
I live in the countryside, so I both like and dislike about this everyman's right. So that I would like to go have the opportunity to go freely to the environment, to the nature, and just pick up those plants that I wished, but I don't at the same time hope that some other people do that in my land. So that's kind of awful thing. But I think that that there are arguments about it. But anyway, it's wonderful that we are allowed and encouraged to use the nature that way, that in the everyman's right allow us to do, because they at the same time say that you have to be careful not to pick everything from the ground, and save some things and be aware of really those plants that are not really easy to get back when they are removed. Finally, all the roots are removed. But there was something else I forgot. What was your question? You have to remind me about this. The everyman's right was the other thing.
About the color, the seasonal colors, because
Yes.
one of the things that Jenni-Liisa and you were talking about was also the fact that you're talking about the everyman's right to go out because of what's available in nature, but also part of that education is learning what not to pick and what to pick, because they were talking about in the last podcast about mushroom, which ones to pick, which ones you couldn't pick, which ones you could use and you couldn't use because of the ingredient, but also there's the seasonal of what colors are available.
Yes, the seasonality, that's kind of also linked to the farming season, so that you have to know at what time you need to pick something, when it's fresh, when it's dried or something, so that, for example, you can feed your animals year round, even in the winter times when there are nothing growing in the outside. But it also has linked to the dyeing, to the natural dyes, to the dye material, so that you know what you can pick in the summertime or springtime, and you get certain colors, and then later in the summertime you can pick the same colors, same plants, but you can get different colors. So you need to know the seasons really well. You need to know what colors or the plants give to you. But also, we have been working with Jenni-Liisa and Laura about the seasonal cycle, so that we know, for example, if we cannot get some plants in the wintertime, we can prepare them beforehand, so that we can get during the wintertime, when we have less work in the outside, we can prepare and dye still, so we can have the dyeing work year round. And it means just the thing that we know the plants, we know the nature, we know the material, and we know how to manipulate them, so that we can get always certain colors, certain dyes, or even specifications because of the aging system in the nature, so that we can get use all of those things, that we can somehow collaborate with the nature.
That's a great answer. That's exactly one of the things that we want to hear is what makes the education important, and how is it cultural, and how is it connected to geography. And that's a perfect example of that, because Pammy and Bentonel, I think you may agree that you don't have that kind of aspect in the UK education, because there's not that, first of all, there's not there every man's right, there's not the emphasis or value on the environment per se like in Nordic countries. So I think that ties in very well with understanding that education, art, design, and craft education is very multifaceted. That you're not just looking at just the craft, but how to make the craft, the coloring of those crafts of handmade, but also the design. What goes into the design choices? What goes into the color, making the color? When can you do it? What the materials are available? And also the art itself, what are you expressing? What are you trying to convey? And how did that tie within the culture? So I think those are all elements that we see that the education aspect of this is very, very complex, as we were talking about earlier with Bivy, with the weaving, is that a lot of this is very complex. And to have that education, to be able to plan it out, you're learning a lot of different aspects of that. And then, of course, you can go off and specialize in any individual one of this. So I want to conclude by asking a few last questions. In your opinion, we've now worked on the project for about a year, going into, or almost 2 years. We're about to go into our final year. Because you all are working on art education and craft design education. What is the goal at the end of the project for art, craft, and design education?
I would like to, I think one of our objectives is to have a package for universities or a program, a package that would allow programs to incorporate the use of natural dyes within their teaching. So I think from my perspective, if we can get to that point, I think we've got something that is useful, might be adoptable by many different colleges around the world. They could adopt it and adapt it to whatever their situation is. For me personally, I think that would be a good starting point in terms of reaching a goal. From a more general point of view, I think we've all got to go, as Päivi has said so often, that sustainability has got to be a really big issue and a really big part in terms of how we teach design and circular design, and making sure that our designers are equipped with the knowledge and the skills to develop designs that are going to be on that sustainable platform and don't add to any of what we see, the difficulties that we see from overproduction.
Is there a goal to have a common educational curriculum across the world, across different programs in the UK and Finland?
I think that would be really hard.
It would be wonderful, but it would be hard, yes.
There's people teaching it after all, and resources differ depending on where you are and what people see as being relevant to the groups that they're teaching. So I think it would be really hard to enforce. The thing is sustainability, I think.
But maybe we can give a guidance, not
Yeah.
like a certain curricula.
Yeah.
Guidance on here's what works, here's what's valuable.
Yeah.
And
That means also that we extend somehow the globalization that has been a big driver in textile and fashion industry, because we have been just enjoying all the opportunities what we can get from around the globe when we just think about the consumption. But if you think about all these research and educational forces and things that we don't even know at this point, so we can get all these opportunities to learn something that we can see a bit now from other cultures, other countries, other industries, and other educators. So we could at least start to get a bit grip about things that we can get forward. I think that at the end of our project, we have quite many undone things still, but we have opportunities to continue. And since we have the network already of researchers and institutions, and education, so there are people with whom to talk. So that is kind of way that could lead to this kind of common education in this area. But it's really utopian task or goal, but I don't see that it's really definitely impossible, but it takes time, it takes effort, and we should somehow exceed the time zones, because there are really like these practical problems because of the time differences. But otherwise, for example, for us in Finland, all these different time zones and geographical and natural zones give us very many ideas to think about, because we have definitely 4 seasons and even 8 seasons in Lapland. So there are certain things that reflect our own these habits and our own needs to somehow enhance our education or enhance our industry or this responsible and sustainable lifestyles.
I think that's a really exciting point to say that you have one thing we want at the end of this is to have a foundation or a background of researchers, of solid research, that where we can develop further and we can be there to help the future of the education. That's a good point, Anna.
I just wanna add, maybe I agree with Anna and Pami, but one thing that I found out as well, but I think it's also part of the project. So I think I would like to bridge actually between traditional knowledge and the modern technology in natural dyes. I found it is quite separate at the moment. So like the traditional knowledge seems like to go create their own communities, where the modern technology seems like want to separate, where I think it shouldn't be that way. There should be a way to bridge, create. But again, maybe it can be with the like educate or like promote knowledge with exchange between all the stakeholders, like artisan, researcher, industry partners, because we found from our review with Pami that there is a lot of knowledge gaps between stakeholders. That's what it's not sustainable yet with the natural dye practices. So because develop new curricular or training skill package that Pami mentioned is one thing for the educators, but to make it all works as one ecosystem, they need to talk to each other, and this traditional knowledge and modern technology need to be connected. We can't just like push their way and then, oh no, just go with the modern, because they are very important as well. So
is that a potential goal for education then, to have courses where it brings in innovative technology and tradition as well?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Also, hopefully with our team in the technology focus, like we work package 5 and 4, they focus on the technology, which can also maybe be implied to the traditional way as well somehow.
I think that in terms of how students progress as well, given how the industry is developing and there's more technology being utilized within the industry, there's whole new careers opening up as well. So it's quite an evolving and quite exciting new opportunities that are developing because of the need for more sustainable processes. Like Bintan was saying, we definitely need more sort of round tables where industry and education and any other stakeholders are talking, and opportunities for that networking.
Maybe a future podcast episode where we bring in some industry people with the researchers. So I want to conclude with a question that I asked all of the guests on the podcast. And it ties in with, of course, the Color for Craft project. And I think it helped. And at the end, I think, Anna, it will help you with kind of like, what does the meaning of color? So in your own words, what does color mean to you?
So color is everything. Color is so much. It's more than just aesthetics, as we have discussed here. It's emotion, culture, maybe also storytelling. It brings materials to life, you can say. Maybe color carries historical significance, maybe environmental significance also. Color is everything. It's very much.
That's a good answer. Absolutely.
I agree with Pivy. I think when I think about color, so in Hindu traditions, when you're grieving death or mourning, widows will wear white, and they wear white because color represents presence of life, and it represents a lot of things, but life in general. And not wearing a color suggests that, for that time being, you have an absence of life as you know it. So to me, color represents everything, as Pipey said, and it's life.
Anna Benton?
For me, color is important, even though you may not always see myself really, really colorful. Color is really lifelong companion in all aspects of life, and I must say that I love black color. It has been my color for decades. But like Pami mentioned about this end of life, that if you move from here to other heavenly places, that my choice of black somehow relates. It is a surprise. It relates to those moments when I lost one of my parents, meaning father. And after that, it happened still to be the punk time. I was kind of rebellious at the same time. So my blue intentions turned to black and stayed forever for some reason. But it is also a professional color. Color is a societal thing at the same time as it is cultural thing and political thing. So there are really many meanings. And as fashion professional, it means that we quite often together say that since we are dealing with so many colors, we need not to have but one color on ourselves. And I love wrapping myself into black. But of course, there are problems. Black color is not so good for your face and next to your face. And especially in winter time in Finland, we don't have lots of sun, so we look quite pale. And it reflects the shadows and really emphasizes all these dark cycles and wrinkles. But so far, I don't mind. I feel comfortable. So it means that it's comforting, but it's also somehow making myself as what I am and I feel like to be.
I heard this expression one time that black is all the colors, which is really interesting to me because if you think about it, yes, you can pull out certain colors from the black, or there's certain elements of it. That's a really good point, Anna.
Yes, and I would like to add to you about something about the color theory. When you mix paints, all the colors create black, but when you mix lights, so you will get white. So it means that we are in the shift of two types of color theories, that now when we are going to the direction of technology, we get always white from all the colors, so all the lights. So that's kind of this or that.
I think, I agree with everybody. But for me personally, color is a tool for communication. So for me, I always use color to say implicitly what I want to say. And maybe like with the black, like Anna mentioned, like, oh, maybe showing like I don't know, grieving. But because again, a little bit about color theory that I learned, that there's a lot of psychology and behind the color. But then I always feel like color is when I want to say something. So like, for example, if I want to, I don't know, it's a statement, like if I want to go somewhere and then I want everybody to look at me, then I will probably use like a bright color. But if I feel like, oh, today I don't want people actually look at me, I will wear like something dark and dull so people will not notice, and that kind of thing. But also back again to our project, when people, because we talk about color forecasting, and then when the designer choose the color of the year, then they also want to say like, oh, we are very, how do I say it, very edgy. We follow the latest trend. But maybe if they use the natural dyes, then they're also showing a statement saying, no, we don't follow trend, but we are making statement. We focus on sustainability. So I think color really a strong tool for me, at least.
It's really interesting to hear all of this. So my perspective is, and it kind of ties with what Ivy said, but to me, color is joy. It's emotion for me. Because when I see a color, like whether it's orange or yellow, which I don't like, but it still brings a certain smile. It's like, oh, it's a bright color. Green is my favorite color. So anytime I see green, it just brings me joy. Red the same way, and I love how seeing other people in their favorite colors, it brings them joy. So for me, it's purely emotional when I think of color. And I think that's really interesting, the way that we all think about it in different ways. It's really important. I want to thank you all for being our guest today, for contributing your perspectives and your thoughts. It's been really interesting, and we hope that our listeners will enjoy it. So thank you again.